What's up, guys? So, as promised, we're going to be diving a little bit into scene nodes again. And in this tutorial, I really want to address what I've seen a lot of people sort of asking about and curious about when scene nodes comes up, especially amongst artists and designers and those sorts of people, is where do I start? And I think that it can be hard because a lot of the content that exists for C nodes is coming from a technical perspective. A lot of it is aimed at sort of like technical people, um, and or maybe it's sort of starting too complicated because a lot of the times the people that are showing you stuff like really know this stuff really well, and I haven't seen much stuff sort of really kind of trying to hold the hand of the people that are starting from absolute zero, who want to get to know scene nodes, who want to start to integrate it into their workflow, and yeah, just get started learning it. So that's the gap I'm trying to fill here, and that's what this is going to be a series, and that's what this series is about. So this video is really just about where to answer that question: where do you get started? So the first thing that I want to talk about is understanding and knowing about the resources that are available to you. So that's going to be where are the tutorials and that sort of stuff, where like basically the stuff that I've been looking at to learn what I've learned so far. So we'll talk about that first. So first you've got Donovan, which is Scene Node Tips. So you should give him a follow and watch all his videos. Um, Very technical, but it's sort of like a kind of starting from the very beginning type stuff, which is really cool. Then you've got Dominic, and you should give him a follow and watch all his videos. I'd say his stuff is more like getting inspired. It's like the this is why you should learn scene nodes as well as being able to pick up a lot of really handy tools. Um, and just really seeing what's possible with C nodes is very good there. So then we've got Cineversity, where there's Dominic again, but you're gonna see stuff with Noseman, stuff with Chris Schmidt. And what I did is you just go here and you type in C nodes and make a playlist and just add all the C nodes videos. And so then you can watch all these. So then you've got Rocket Lasso with Chris Schmidt, and he definitely talks about C notes. And another thing is that they've made a bunch of the scene note tools that are already inside of Cinema 4D. And at this point, most of them are free now. They just come with Cinema 4D. Like some of them, they were kind of behind that paywall, but now pretty much all of them, except for I think Ivy Generator and the Picture Frame Maker, are free. The other thing you want to get from Rocket Lasso is the explanations of the free seed nodes that you have. In this video, I am going to, after we do this introduction, I'm going to be talking about, as I said, like where do you start with scene nodes? And I think that the place you need to start is understanding selections, because before you can really do anything, you need to be able to make a selection and pick where you're going to affect things. And so I have this little node that I made, which is called Visualize Selections. And that's just what it does. It just lets you visualize your selections. Like I said, this video series is going to be kind of geared at artists. We like to see things. So yeah, that's what this node does. It lets you visualize your selection. It's free on my Gumroad. So I would recommend you just go there, download that, check it out. if you're there and you decide that you need some fire or something like that, you can pick some of that up too. That'd be just great. Okay, so those are the video resources and tutorial resources. Other resources are going to be, if you come to your asset browser, and you can see I've just typed this in, I was getting ready. If you look under Rocket Lasso, you can see lots of scene nodes for all the Rocket Lasso nodes. And you should familiarize yourself with the nodes that they supplied. They are super powerful, and you know, really, really well done and really useful. Like, and I think that you really need to explore these because the use cases are not super obvious. Like, for example, this wave node um, by Rocket Lasso, you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, you can make a bunch of waves. That's cool. But something that might not immediately be obvious, actually, let's just drop one in a node spline. And you can just drop this in the object object manager as well, but I'm gonna just try and get in the habit of using scene nodes whenever we want or whenever we can. So there's a bunch of options in here, and like I said, you know, watch Chris Smith's video to learn all about it. But one of the things that's really cool, and again, I'm showing this because I'm saying it's not as obvious, is you can just go in here and click custom, and if we take our frequency all the way down, and there's this little thing going up, so I've found out, just put 0.999, not quite 1. It will fix that. But, and let's put this to 100, so that now we've got kind of a perfect replica of this curve. And basically what this is just, you can just go in here and just draw any curve. So let's just set this to linear, and you can just come and draw any kind of curve that you want. And it's just a completely custom curve builder for any curve, and it basically has resampling built in, and that frequency, you can increase that, decrease it, and just that in and of itself, honestly, is like again, that's just really, really powerful. What are these? Let's go. Well, whatever. Yeah, just being able to control and draw basically any sort of spline and have it be totally procedural is really, really powerful, with, you know, obviously options in here to scale it, to repeat it. Yeah, this is super powerful, and all those nodes are powerful. That's one of your resources that you should check out and familiarize yourself with. Now, beyond Rocket Lasso, you can just come in here and let's get rid of that and just say nodes in general, and maybe you need to actually type that in. Let's just say nodes, or let's go to all. There we go. This is what I was looking for. And yeah, you've got lots of examples and scene files. So these can be really helpful to get started. Yeah, so all these guys as well. Okay, so that's that part. So that's where you can start learning stuff. Now, where to start in terms of, you know, using nodes? Well, the first thing to understand is the different node types, and when it comes to, you know, making things and how you can use them. So you've got a nodes mesh, a node spline, and a nodes modifier. And then you've got this object group. And these, the nodes modifier, let's just make a cube. This one will sort of like work like a modifier. So you can use it to just modify a model. You would typically use it if you want it to be a child, like basically kind of like deformers. And the other node modifiers that we have, like a geometry axis, like you just drop this under here and you can move your axis. But again, it's something where you're gonna feed it a mesh that you want to do something with. So like here, we could maybe since we're going to be talking about selections, let's just say select and take our geometry and drop it into here. And let's grab this and let's select some edges. This is probably a good example because I'm gonna explain this a bit later, but you can see it now. So edges, you select by the points. So you can say 1, 7. So you say 1-7. And then I'm going to also select 2, 4. So comma or line break 2-4. And we can't see our selections. So let's visualize. This isn't actually, so this is one of, there's limitations with this. We're not actually going to be able to see this selection because for edges, this visualize selection creates geometry. And with this nodes modifier, actually, you know what? I'm not sure. Let's just see. So let's do that. And you see it takes the selection and that, and hopefully this doesn't destroy anything. So let's say edges, cross your fingers. Maybe best case scenario, it just doesn't work. Okay, doesn't work. That's fine. That's what I expected. So press Q to send that out, but we've got those edges selected. You can take my word for it. And then let's do a chamfer. Hello, mouse. And set it to edges. 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 Oh, I just didn't see it. Okay, let's do that, and we can add some subdivisions. And so you can see that normally, if we wanted to do something like that, we would have had to take this mesh and press C to collapse it, but this is still totally procedural, so we can still make all the changes that we want to this. We could make another chamfer. And change this to all and really do that. Way less subdivisions, like maybe just a couple. Yeah, so you can see you can come in here and start modeling, but this is, again, this is still totally a procedural shape. So yep, so that's the nodes modifier. You can also use it for, I mean, obviously you can do all sorts of stuff with it. Let's just make a new scene. Let's close this for a second. And let's find our elephant. Drop him in here. Just for simplicity, I'm going to just delete his eyeballs. And I'm going to drop him in a subdivision surface and just press C so it's a few more points. And then if we go to nodes, there's a couple nodes that I made. So here's this world space normal vertex map creator. So we can just drop that under here. And then if you select that, you can see it just creates a vertex map on y plus. And you can do y minus, x plus, x minus, and then it is scaled by this curve. So just a very quick and fast way to make a vertex map and be able to remap it. So we could take this, bring that up. So really quick, really flexible, something like that. Then we also have one for the normal. So if we select this one, you can see similar, but this is based on the normals in it also. Just like that, and also you can do all the directions. So this can be really useful, and that's geometry modifiers. And it's just cool because you already have something, like you've already got a model you're doing stuff with, and then you just drop that on and you can get something from the model that you drop it on. These can also be used, let's just delete all this, as generators. So in a similar situation, let's we could just drop a sphere, drag that sphere under the nodes mesh, and let's go and change this to icosahedron, and let's jump into the nodes mesh. And over here we can right click and say add an input and say object child. We could also say object link. And right now this object is a child, but let's just say for whatever reason the object wasn't a child and we didn't, maybe it's being used somewhere else. For whatever reason, we don't want to make it a child, then we can make it an object link, and then you just drop it in here. And once you have that in there, you can connect that here, and then here is where you do all the stuff to it. So let's say we just make a random selection, and in this case, well, we'll get to that later, actually. So let's just make a random selection of edges, and then there's another node that I made here, and this is the edge selection to spline. So we put the selection here, the geometry here, and then do that there. Since we didn't add this as a child, the original mesh is still there. But let's just say we can do a transform geometry, and let's just move this over. And you can see that we've got our selection of edges right here. So now we're generating just the same way that you've probably used like a edge to spline sort of generator before. So this is just that same thing, but with scene nodes. So now we've generated these edges, and then we can do all the normal stuff that you might do with edges, like sweep these or whatever. And both the nodes mesh and the node spline can do that and can work that way. And then also you can just build stuff completely from scratch within these node. So you could just come in here. Let's say we make a cube and just press Q to output that. And then you can just start modeling on this cube just directly from within the nodes. So you can use something that you've already got from the object manager. You can make things completely from scratch, just building it straight up in nodes. And you can and you can modify things that you already have here. And the last one to talk about is the object group, which is sort of the way that I see it. And know that I'm still pretty new to nodes myself, and I think that that's why this series might be helpful, because I'm like you. I'm really just kind of learning stuff. I'm probably just like a few lessons ahead of you watching this, trying to learn. But basically, when nodes were first introduced, like if I close this and it's still going to be on that. I don't know how to, let's just get rid of both of these. And then if I open this, no graph is selected. All right, well, what if I make a new scene and open this? There we go. This is what I was trying to get to. Oh yeah, you go over here and do it. Anyway, when nodes were first introduced, they had this sort of like scene mode where you could come in here and we can just do the same thing. Let's just say we make a cube, and you'll get one. It'll just do it automatically. It'll make this geometry op. So you could do things like this, and you would there's nothing in the object manager. You're just kind of like creating stuff and dropping it directly as a child of the scene. But you have nothing to interact with in the object manager. You're really kind of making stuff really from scratch. Like you've got a mesh here and it's got points, but you don't have what I think that me not really knowing anything about nodes, what it's actually called is a matrix, but what I would have called it is like a transform node. It's basically that thing that you have that lets you move your object around. Because what you have in here are the components essentially, and you can move those components by changing the size of the cube and stuff like that. But you don't have that node on top that just lets you move, scale, and rotate this, and that is a matrix. So you can drop that in here, and now you can move the whole object and scale it and do the normal things that you would normally do. Anyway, so this was kind of like the first sort of like pass, I think, at seed nodes. Was just kind of in the very first videos, this is what working with it looked like. The object group is sort of like a node, and as the name says, it can be a group of objects. So within the object group, like I said, with the nodes mesh, you would use that if the final thing that you want to output is a mesh, obviously. The node spline, you use that if the final thing that you want to output is a spline. But with the object group, you can, you can output lots of objects, all the objects, basically. You need all that stuff though. So let's make a matrix. One little trick is if you just connect the matrix here, you get the geometry node for free. So you can save yourself the step of doing that. And if you want to have both of these in the scene, you are basically kind of replicating that thing that we had where it said scene and children. So you can make this children op and put this here, put this here and take this and output that. And you see we get both these objects in the scene, and we've got an object in the object manager. And with this matrix, we can move these around. So each one of these is basically the transform for this object. So that's the object group. And one thing that's cool about the object group is if we grab that, oh, there it is. You can put this into instance, render instance, or multi-instance mode. So let's just say we take our cube, and I'm going to make let's grab one of these distributions. Let's just do a grid. Let's not try and get fancy. And in the matrix op for this cube, I'm just going to drag this grid distribution, which is going to give us this. And obviously, so in its current mode, these are all instances. But let's just let's push it. We want to do this in X. Let's just do way more in X and way more in Z. And you can see things starting to slow down. So you can maybe see that the scene is slowing down a little bit. But then we can switch that into multi-instance, and you can see that things are snappy again. Okay, so that's another thing to sort of know about the, the introduction into the object group. Okay, so that's the introduction into those things. So let's now move on to the first thing. So as I said, this is really about where to start. Hopefully everything, I mean, if you've even touched scene nodes, you probably know the stuff that I just said, but I just want to be thorough and just, again, take things from the very beginning. I just realized I forgot something, which is that in terms of resources, I forgot one resource. You should grab Dominic's tools. Dominic also has, I may have mentioned it quickly, but he's got his free tools. They're really useful. They're on his Gumroad and they're free. So you should absolutely go grab those and add those to your database. Okay, so there's that. So yeah, okay, let's talk about selections. So anyway, as I was saying, selections are the first thing that I think you really need to understand, because the first thing that you can actually do with scene nodes as an artist that is going to actually be useful to you is just doing procedural modeling. With procedural modeling, you don't need to do any kind of like a whole bunch of messing around with arrays or anything super crazy. You can just use the selections and the modeling tools, and you can actually get a lot of power just out of that. And so I made a simple example. So there's a project I came across on Behance. It's just a cool little thing. And I saw this little shape, which is, you can see that it's like glass on the inside. It's got a metal rim on the edges. It's got a little white cap on the front. And I thought that this would make a good example of an area where you can make this procedural shape. If you go up here, you can see that you've got this same sort of thing again. Here, this is kind of like a little bit of a variation. And then here, you've got this round shape. It's kind of similar, all following this kind of shape language where we've got these shapes where it's kind of like glass and then metal and, this pattern. So I didn't build out the entire thing, like I didn't build out the interior parts, but what you'll see is that I easily could have done that. It's just taking it a bit further. So we've got a single object in our object manager, and then we've got these exposed parameters. So let's take a look inside this. Yeah, where's the one? There it is. Grab that. So the reason that I wanted to show this example is because I'm not doing anything with any kind of arrays or anything that any of you wouldn't understand just by looking at this. The only thing that you have to understand to be able to do this is just making selections. You have to understand how to make procedural selections, and then all of this. So actually, let me just kind of go through this really quick. So as I said, this is composed of all those different pieces. There's glass on this middle part, there's a cap on the front and the back, and then there's a rim around the edge. Our exposed parameters are, we can change the rim thickness like this. We can change the overall depth. Right now, this is scaling from one side, but we can change where it scales from. So we can scale both sides at the same time. Or it can scale from the other direction. So then we have the rim position. So we can move that in or out. The overall width and height of it. So we can just change the overall shape. And notice again that everything, all these different parts, all follow this shape. There we go. And we've got that front part, can be thicker or thinner. And that's what I've got exposed here. So I just want to walk through this really quick. So we started this with a rectangle, and then it's just really, this is just, you got to tessellate the spline. But then, so you start with actually, let's do it like this. So we started with this rectangle, and then we extrude the rectangle. These sorts of bevels, obviously, that just comes from that original rectangle spline. So then we have a geometry axis. This is what allows us to control the pivot point. And then things break out to the different parts. So this middle part, which is just this part, is basically ends up being the glass. So you can see we are storing the selection so that we get our selection. Oh, okay. I was like, where'd my selections go? I forgot. It's because I'm not outputting this anymore. So we stored our selections so that we can apply different materials to the different parts of this. But at this point, the selections aren't stored yet. So we come in here, and this is probably a good time to use the visualize selection node so we can see what's happening. So this is let's actually start at the front and back. So put that here, and we can grab this here, and then that, and then we need to just grab this. So first, you can see we select the front and the back. We then invert that selection and delete that part so that we just have this left over. Thicken that, and then we store that selection to shade it. That's the front faces. If we come up here to the rim, we do the same thing. We select, invert that selection, delete that part, Then we thicken this outside rim. Wait a minute, let me just see this again. Hold on. So we have this rim thickness, blah, 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 blah. I don't do that. Okay, well, anyway, yeah, we got that. I'm a little like, wait a minute, what did I do here? We thickened it, and then we just kind of bevel the edges. And that's basically that piece of geometry. I made this a while ago, so I'm like, I'm kind of forgetting exactly what I did. I'm honestly a little bit confused. Like, what did I do here? We deleted that. All right, well, anyway, I won't try and remember that in the middle of the video. I did something and it worked. So yeah, so those are all the parts. And we end up with this guy. So, okay, sure, that's simple. But the power and the benefit of building this procedurally. So that's cool. We made this one thing. But here's where things get, where you really can see the benefit. If we take this rectangle, make a copy of it, and then I'm going to say toggle node type. This is going to make this the sort of slime primitive, and we can go in here and we can select something else. So let's come in here and make a circle. And let's take this and drop this as the first node. And you can see everything updates. The whole rig updates now. Let's take that and make a whatever. Let's make an inside. Where are you, inside? There you are. And drop that in there. The whole thing updates. Turn on some rounding. And we've got a whole new variation. If we select the node, all that stuff that we messed with, all this stuff still works. So let's go back to the rectangle. And something else to know about is if we drop this in a cloner, all these exposed parameters, you notice that the overall depth has this little purple keyframe. That's because I'm using a field driver on that parameter. So if we turn on the random effector in this spherical field, you can see that that parameter can very easily get connected to MoGraph. And just to say that any parameter that you expose, you can use the field driver and have that get connected into MoGraph and do all the normal MoGraphy stuff on your procedural mesh. If we look into the material here, you can see that we've got some MoGraph information on that glass. And in our, not that one, this random, you can see that we are controlling the color. So if we do a quick render of this, you can see that all these guys are totally, again, like I said, connected to MoGraph. All that stuff works, so we can get random colors. We can do all the normal stuff, except this is a totally procedural mesh. We could even, well, I won't get into that. I mean, that gets into just kind of like making it more complicated. The point I wanted to show is that this is simple, that you can take just the simple parts of nodes and you can do cool, powerful things. So if you just think about all the different parameters that you could potentially create and expose and then animate and do stuff with MoGraph, it opens up without doing anything with an array. Don't need to touch arrays. Without any of that, you can come in and do really cool and powerful stuff. Okay, so that was just a quick example. Let's get into the part that we actually want to talk about, which is the very first thing that you're going to need to get familiar with, which is making selections. So I don't want the video to drag for too long. Let's go in and make let's actually just start in nodes. So let's make a nodes mesh. And in here, let's make a sphere. And let's make this an icosahedron and make it a little bigger. Okay, so there's a few gotchas and some things you gotta sort of wrap your heads around when it comes to nodes. And one of the big ones is just making selections and the active selection and all this sorts of stuff. So if there's all these nodes in here. Where's that thing? It's all the way over here. Let's go to geometry selection. So there's all these guys. These are all the tools, the modifiers, whatever you call them, nodes, to make selections. And hopefully you went to my Gumroad and downloaded Visualize Selection. That's going to make this a lot easier. So let's just go in and so let's say we do an inset. Okay, so that inset all the faces, and then we do an extrude. All right, so this is going to be maybe like one of the first points of friction is if you inset and then you do an extrusion, you might have been expecting that the extrusion was going to happen on the faces that you just inset. But that's not what's going to happen by default. So you can see that within this inset, it says the selection string, which is basically what you're going to be using to select stuff, is set to default. And that basically means nothing is selected, but as nothing is selected, then I'm going to apply this to everything. So another type of selection that you can have is called the active selection. So if we come in here, let's see, and we say, I think this is how this works. Yep, so if we come in here and we first, before we make the inset, we just say select all the faces. Now all the faces becomes an active selection that you then inset, but that active selection gets embedded in this stream of data. So before, that default selection was just saying nothing is selected, and then you did something and nothing was embedded, so it's still that same nothing, or in this case it would be everything, but everything first. That doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's all the faces but not including the new ones that got created when you did the inset. It's that first everything being selected, if that makes sense. I know that's like a word salad. Long story short, if you wanted to do something like that, do a select first and say all. You have to basically create an active selection that gets embedded into the stream. So now let's say you go in here, because another way that you can select things is you can just directly type in the index numbers of whatever it is that you're trying to act upon. So we're doing this to polygons. So Oh, another thing that you might want to set up, because you're going to be using it a lot, is getting these buttons that make the polygon indices and the point indices just somewhere where you can click them quickly. Where they exist in the menu is under options, and you've got these here. That's where they are. To turn them into buttons, you just do the normal thing: window, customize palettes, and index. Yeah, you just grab that and drag it somewhere. Okay. So this model selected, can do that, and you can see there are the polygon indices. So if we just come in here and we say, let's only do this to 0 through, oh, this is one of the ways that you can type in selection string. It's index dash and then let's say 50. Okay, so only 0 through 50 got the inset. Cool. Now let's extrude those. And what you're going to see is that, again, everything got extruded. It's ignoring this selection. So within a tool like this, within a command or whatever you call it, a node, if you type in the selection like this, it's basically just for this node. So it doesn't get passed down to all the other nodes. One thing that you could do is this selection string can be exposed. You can see you just press here. We could go into this extrude and press this here. And if you say string, you can just go in here and make a string. And in this string, you could say 0 through 60. And you could do that like that. And so then both of these guys are getting this same selection. That's one way to do it. But a lot of the time, sometimes you are just going to, want to type in a selection. That's going to be the thing you want to do. But a lot of times you're going to be, obviously we're doing things procedurally, you're going to be making procedural selections. So when you make selections using any of these tools, that's going to, so like again, if we come in here, we like to make a random extrude. Let's take this and just say default. You can see that we're getting behavior that we expect because this random selection is making an active selection, and that is getting embedded in the stream. So after this, if we make another inset, you can see that that face is going to get inset, and if we make another extrude, then that face is going to get extruded. Okay, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. Any one of these tools that you use, that's going to make an active selection. If you go in here and manually type a selection, it's going to be just for that node, and it's not going to get passed on. So another thing to know, so let's just say that the first thing that we do is let's do this with the random again. We make a random selection, and then we call this rando. After our inset, let's put another node in here, and we just say select all again. And we've got something like this happening. But if we wanted to, since we've stored this selection, this has become something that we can call from nodes in the future. And another thing, this is pretty basic, but I remember when I was first learning, it got me because the first thing I did was I was like, okay, I'm going to go in here and say rando. rando. And let's just do this to just that one. And what I was expecting to happen didn't happen. And it's because strings have to be in quotes. So make sure that you don't just type the name, you have to put it in quotes, and then you get your selection. So at any point in time, once you store that selection, you can call it from any node. So let's copy this selection. Let's call this one rando, rando2. And we're just going to invert the selection. And actually, no, rando2, let's give it a different seed. And I'm going to drop that in here. So in the original inset, instead of that getting the default selection, let's have that get rando. And you can see that we get something like this. And in the extrude, we can say, we could do rando2. But what else we could do is we could say rando plus rando2. And we can use plus, we could say rando minus rando2. That's going to subtract from the selection. Let's do this. I've got this node out here and I'm not using it. So you can see how this works. We can see our selection. Okay, but I don't want to use it right now. And something else that you can do that is very useful is you can use an ampersand. And what ampersand means is it's like an intersect. So it's saying the selection. So if we look here, or no, what we want to do is I'm going to grab that and then do that. So that's rando. That's rando2. And I'm just going to make a selection node, and I'm going to do that same thing here. And I'm going to say rando ampersand, not that, rando2. And let's grab that and put that in there. And so again, let's just see this again. So that's rando, that's rando2. And this is the overlap of both of those. So because this is, I think this is kind of important. So let's do one more example. So let's make a, spell it right, cylinder. Okay, and let's make it a little bigger. No, like that. Maybe add a couple subdivisions along the height. And for this, I'm going to add a select facing. And let's visualize the selection. And make sure that this is set to polys, and make sure that this is set to polys, and it's X. So let's say Y, and I'm going to say Y plus and minus. So it's selecting the top and the bottom. And then let's actually, it would be nice to have an invert built into that, but let's invert that selection. So now this is what we have selected. And then I'm just going to do a random selection. And you can see that we get something like that. So what if I want a random selection, but I want to exclude this top and the bottom here? So again, that's this is kind of like a bug, I think. All right, so this is the random selection. It doesn't have anything to do with this inverted selection, but I'm just going to take this invert. Random has this built in. We'll call this Randy. And at the invert, after that, we're going to store the selection. And we'll call this inv. And we'll put that into the random selection. And then we can make a new select after the random selection. And we're going to say Randy ampersand inv. And you can see that we get a selection of the random minus the top and the bottom. So this is all stuff that you can do to modify and create selections. So I don't want this. So I think that those were the main things that I'm not going to go through every single one of the. Okay, I remember there is one more thing that I want to talk about because it can be. There is one selection thing in here that that I wanted to show. So let's do the ring selection and the loop selection. These were confusing to me at first. Like I said, what I want you to do is go download this visualize selection, then go through and just play with all these selections and all the stuff that I just told you, and practice getting the selection that you want and making sure that you can actually do that. So I'm also gonna just make sure and show you how to actually use this so that you can see all the selections. We've only done faces so far. So a couple more things, and then we're gonna end this video because it's dragging. So the ring selection. Let's come here and grab this, and it says edge point A, edge point B. So, and let's say we're gonna select edges. Now ring selection is like all these edges, these guys right here. So if we want to, so let's change our visualize selection to be edges, which we don't have one yet. So let's actually just look at him again. And now let's select or look at our points. So what it's wanting is the 2 points of an edge. So if we wanted to select this ring, then we need to give it one of these edges. So I could say 77 and 78. So if we come in here and we type 77, 78, and then we visualize that, you can see that is the ring that we have selected. So we've got that ring selected. Loop works basically the same way. So let's look at these again, and let's undo that and just look at the geometry. So we could say 28, 35. 28, 35. And let's drop that back into here. Make sure that's on edges. Make sure this is on edges. Why aren't you working? Da, 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 da. Selection, geometry. Let's disconnect that. Let's say 28, 35, 21. Let's try this one, 21, 28. I might be doing it. Maybe the order matters. 21, 28. Interesting. Loop. Oh, that's on polys. Okay, I thought I already clicked edges on that. That's weird. All right, so now that's how that works. I guess I messed up. So yeah, that's how those two work. That wasn't obvious to me when I was learning how to do that. So that's how loop selection works. It's the points, and you have to put them in like point A, point B on a segment. Which reminds me of the other thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned, which is manually typing in edge selections in the selection string. So if we grab a select and go to edges, the way, let's just grab this, output that, come back here and turn these on. The way that this selection string works with edges is also similar to what I just showed. It's going to be 14 to select this edge. You put in 14-21. So 14-21, and if we, well, actually, we can just do that here. And you can see that we've got that edge selected. That can be confusing because if we were in points mode, 14-21 means select points 14 through 21. But if you're in edge mode, that's the index of the two edge segments, and that's how that works. So if you wanted to select multiple edges, again, you can either do a line break or a comma. So if you did 21, 28, you could say comma 21-28, and let's make sure. Is it there? Can't see it. Do we need a space? Or do you have to do a line break? Did I do? Hold on. Ah. Okay. I see what I did. The visualize, I was looking at the indexes from the geometry produced by this visualize selection. Okay. So the one that I was looking at is actually 13-20. And then, whoops, there we go. User error. So, and let's just make sure that this is what I thought, that you can do this and then a comma. And yeah, you can see that that also works. Okay, so those are the main things, the main gotchas. Now beyond that, if you get the visualize selection node, you can just come in here and start to, like, most of these are pretty self-explanatory, or you can just use it and then you can kind of, you can kind of tell what it does just by using it. But yeah, the best way to get used to these is to just go in and start playing with it and with the visualize selection node, and that will allow you to actually see what you're doing. Also should say that Dominic also has visualization tools. You can see those guys up here. His are work through the object manager. You see, so like we've got these two edges selected. So let me just see if I come here and do this. So the way his work, this is color selection edges. All right, this is the edges one. So you feed it the object, and there's your selection. So it's a little different, but yeah, it just works in the object manager. And yep, there it is. So again, you should definitely pick up Dominic's stuff. It's super helpful. So yeah, I think that getting used to selections is really the first step. Obviously, after that, it's modeling, just like all the modeling tools. So it's really the selection. Then once you've got the selection, you can start to do all this stuff. But all this is stuff that you're used to doing. So once you get the hang of making selections, then you're just doing the same stuff that you would normally do in the object manager, except you've got, a procedural sort of node graph where you can see what's affecting what, where you can have one thing affect multiple things at the same time, and all the normal power that nodes gives you without messing with arrays and all that sort of stuff. I mean, eventually you will probably want to do that, but again, I'd say at the very beginning, again, this video is about where do you start. If you're coming from zero, where do you start? This is where you start. Start with selections and start making some procedural models. Okay, so we're going to end this one here. I just remembered one more thing. This is maybe not even, I mean, it might be getting a little crazy for this video, but I did have one more example, and I'm just going to walk through this because I showed all those ways that you could make selections. What I also wanted to just really quickly show is that you can also make selections through, like a node-based selection. So we got a plane, we made a random selection, and another node that I made is this edge selection to spline. I'm glad I just saw this because I meant to mention this also. So this edge selection to spline node is, as I think I mentioned it before, but it's just a node that will allow you to take a selection of edges and it outputs a spline. Normal edge to spline nodes just do the whole geometry and don't respect edges. So that's what this guy does. But if you download my selection visualizer, so visualize selection, if you take this and you go to assets, edit asset as group, and you go to the visualize edges part, you get this also. This is also in there. So you can just kind of take this and save this to a database and you'll have this guy also. It's inside the visualize selection. So anyway, we are outputting this these edges. It's one edge made up of a bunch of segments. So here we explode the spline segments so that now they're all, it's not like one spline anymore, it's like all the splines. And then iterate is basically saying do this to each one of these splines that we are now dealing with. and we're saying, give me the points information of all those splines. And then this is basically saying, so all the splines have 2 points, and this is saying, give me the second point. And the output of that, so if we look here, you can see we've got an array of one value, which is another array that has the 2 points of the spline. So this is point 0, this is point 1. So we said, give me the second one. So here you can see it's an array, and this is point 0, or the first one, I don't know, whatever. It's one of them. So we got one of the points. That can also be used as a selection string. So we've now selected that, all those points, and then I just put this transform selection on there so you can see that those points are indeed selected. So that's another more advanced way to make selections, but as you get more advanced, you're gonna have to select things that way also. But again, in the beginning, just making selections and modeling unlocks a lot of power that you don't currently have without scene nodes. And just remember that any parameter that you output, it can easily be connected to MoGraph through the field driver. So anything you put a field driver on, you can then use MoGraph and use the whole crown jewel of Cinema 4D, the MoGraph system, to affect it and do all the normal crazy stuff that MoGraph can do. Okay, so that's an introduction. I think, well, I don't want to say what I'm going to talk about next because I haven't super figured it out yet, but it'll probably be, again, like just kind of doing some basic procedural modeling. Is probably where we'll go from here. But hopefully that was understandable, that I didn't ramble too much, and you get some use for it. Again, hit up my Gumroad, get the visualize selection node. That will help a lot. And I will see you all in the next tutorial. Later.